It's so rare now for politicians to understand science or medicine. And because the Earth is in the intensive care unit, acutely critically ill, it's actually dying as I speak, we can't have people running this country, the most powerful country on earth, who do not understand science. It's inappropriate for people... It's inappropriate for people to say they don't believe in global warming. It's like saying, well, I don't believe I've got an appendix. I don't believe I've got a stomach or a tongue. It's not a matter of belief. That's scientific reality, that they do have a tongue and they do have an appendix, and scientific reality is the world is heating. And the International Panel on Climate Change, all the scientists in the world agree. So how dare people say they don't believe in it? What are they on about? I don't understand their mentality. I think it's a little bit scary what's happening to the planet. And I think when people get scared, particularly when they're not well educated, they tend to become superstitious. And they go back to religion or, you know, it almost feels like America's going back to the Dark Ages when people didn't believe in science or rationality or reasoned thinking at all. And it's scary because it's the opposite of what we need people to do. I won't go into the Tea Party. Okay, I think I'll start off tonight. I wrote this book called If You Love This Planet in '91, and I've just updated it. And I wrote about global warming in this book: ozone depletion, overpopulation, toxic pollution, deforestation, desertification. And I thought, well, I've written about it, and everyone will read it, and they'll stop global warming. Well, I'm just very stupid and foolish, because a few people read it, but no one did a thing about it. And it's very interesting because I've just been to Wall Street, and I spoke there last night. And there is such an amazing feeling there. I think after this lecture, if you can all get down there, you really must. I have not felt such an excitement in the air and a calm determination for years, maybe for decades. And it's not terribly organised, and more people are coming, and now the unions have joined. So the Transport Workers Union refused to drive the buses with the people the police have arrested to jail, so they can't get their people to jail. And the nurses have joined in, who are the other unions? All the unions. So it's really growing, and the students are there too. People are coming from Spain to join. Students are coming. A girl came from, I think, Chicago. Her name is Ketchup. Can you imagine calling a kid Ketchup? And she's got flaming red hair like that awful Rebecca Brooks has, who worked with Rupert Murdoch. Do you know the one I mean? But she just got in the plane with $30 for food, no sleeping bag. She didn't know how she was going to survive, and she's become a main organiser there. And people have set up food stations. People are contributing food. It's the beginning of a revolution. And by God, does this country need a revolution? We need a revolution. And revolutions are always led by the youth. If you go back to the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, all revolutions are led by the youth, except I think your revolution, which was led by who? The Minuteman, right? And a few others like that. Well, it wasn't really a revolution. I mean, yeah, you took over from the British. We don't like the British in Australia either. We think they're arrogant. But we don't have a very good government at the moment, except the Green Party holds the balance of power. And we're passing very good laws on carbon reduction right now. Okay, so global warming. Have you all learned about it at school? You know what's happening. You know that the Earth is filling up the atmosphere with carbon dioxide, which acts like a sheet of glass around the Earth. So when you park your car in the sun and you wind up the windows, the infrared radiation gets in, no, the white light gets in and turns into infrared radiation, which gets trapped by the glass, and you can hardly get in your car on a hot day, it's so hot. People sometimes leave their children by mistake in the car and they die. And that's what's happening to the Earth, it's heating up. The white light gets in, heats up the surface of the planet, turns to infrared radiation and gets trapped. What's causing it? Wow. I can't believe the number of SUVs I've seen since I've been in these great big cars with huge tyres. You know, talk about testosterone poisoning. And they do 5 miles to the gallon. They should be absolutely banned. Banned. And no one should be driving an SUV. Mothers shouldn't be driving their children to ballet classes in SUVs. They should be banned. And you all should have Priuses, and they should be subsidised by your government. I've got a Prius that does about 45 miles to the gallon in Australia. Now, where's the money going to come from? Oh, but your government's in debt. Ooh. But where's your money going? You all pay your taxes, right? 56% of your discretionary taxes, or 63%, goes to where? Military. The Pentagon. Now, you don't need a defence system because you don't have any enemies. Do you? Well, what about the terrorists? Whoa. So you're going to spend $1 trillion a year because of the terrorists? If you spend $1 million a minute since Jesus was born, you still wouldn't spend $1 trillion. And where does that money go, your hard-earned money? Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, Lorex or Lol or something. I mean, you can't believe the number of corporations that are stealing your money. And they have to have wars to justify making more weapons, because when you have a war, you destroy your weapons, and then you have to make more weapons. And you have to build drones so you can kill people from consoles at Chiva in, I don't know what state that is, but they're sitting at their consoles, these men and women, watching wedding parties and stuff, and they launch a missile. And contrary to what happens with guys who drop bombs, they just fly back to their aircraft carrier and they don't know what happens. These people are watching the body parts on television, the children being disintegrated, the babies, heads, arms, pigs rooting around in human bodies. And these people have to get counselling because it's disturbing them. Well, so it should disturb them. How dare America be killing people from a console in Chiva in Afghanistan? Well, the military says it's good because it saves American lives. But what about the lives of the people in Afghanistan? Do they not count? And anyway, you've all got to stop killing each other. In the nuclear age, if the Second World War was fought today, Europe would be uninhabitable forever because it's covered with nuclear power plants and they would all melt down like Fukushima. You can't have a war on your territory because you've got 104 reactors. In each reactor is as much radiation as 1,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. America would be uninhabitable. So you can only have wars in poor little developing countries like Afghanistan, one of the poorest countries on earth. How dare America be there killing those people? No country's ever won Afghanistan. The Brits were there and they lost, you know. They got a bit of common sense. So the Pentagon is all about war. Do you know they're ringing China with military bases now? Well, China's your biggest trading partner. It supports your foreign debt, right? Yeah. But the Pentagon is turning it into an enemy, and they're writing long articles about how China is going to be the new enemy. In the nuclear age, war is obsolete. And I'll get onto that in a minute, because we're going to blow up the planet. Of the 22,000 hydrogen bombs in the world today, America and Russia own 97% of them. New York is targeted with 40 hydrogen bombs as I speak. Bob McNamara, former Secretary of Defence for Jack Kennedy, and I wrote an article about that. 60 hydrogen bombs on Washington. One bomb, and this university is certainly targeted with at least one hydrogen bomb from Russia, because all universities are targeted, all factories, there's such a redundancy of weapons, you see. And Russia and America own 97% of these. So who are the real rogue states? What is the axis of evil? And Russia and America are friends. Why have they still got these weapons on hair trigger alert? I flew over the Dakotas the other day, and if you look down from the plane, there are these round circles on the ground, and they're connected by roads, and there are hundreds of them. And then each of those round circles is a missile carrying 3 hydrogen bombs, 3. And there are 2 men in each missile silo, one each armed with a pistol, one to shoot the other if one shows signs of deviant behaviour. Come on, you guys, why aren't you laughing? Who would be the most likely person to use his pistol? The deviant one, yeah? I've spoken to their girlfriends out there. They take drugs before they go down into their silos sometimes. They're aged 18 to 21. They're Pavlovian dogs. Yes, sir, no, sir, press the button, sir. And blow up the planet. America's got about 1,200 H-bombs on hair trigger alert, and Russia's got about 22,000. And there are only 240 major cities in the Northern Hemisphere. And I'll just drop a bomb here to describe what I'm talking about. You know, the first bomb that they ever blew up in the desert was called Trinity. Fancy naming an atomic bomb after the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And there was an outside possibility that when the bomb blew up, the whole atmosphere could be rendered critical and the Earth could be enveloped in a nuclear explosion. They were even taking bets on it, the physicists. They were betting. If the bomb hadn't worked, the telegram to the president was to read, "It's a girl." It read, "It's a boy." There's been sexism in the nuclear military and the nuclear power industry forever. How dare they? And when Oppenheimer, who founded the atomic bomb and the Manhattan Project, watched the bomb explode, he realised that man had captured the energy of the sun. What is it? You all know, E equals mc squared. And he said to himself, "I have become death, the destroyer of worlds," from the Bhagavad Gita. He knew. And he said, for the first time, physicists have known sin, and they have been sinning ever since. So just imagine, we don't have NPR on right now. You know, sometimes you're listening to NPR and it says, "Woo, this is just a test of the emergency broadcasting system." But imagine by mistake or computer error or a virus getting into the Russian early warning system. There's a virus at the moment in the drone system and they can't get rid of it. And you young ones understand viruses. And the bombs were launched in Moscow 20 minutes ago. Now they take half an hour to get here, half an hour. And they come in at 20 times the speed of sound, so we won't hear it. And we're not listening to the radio to know, but I don't. Do you have a fallout shelter here? Do you have a fallout shelter? Do you? Well, you may, well, I mean, it won't save your life anyway. So and it could happen tonight, I kid you not. It will come in and land here on this auditorium with a heat and explode with a heat inside the centre of the sun. And dig a hole 3/4 of a mile wide and 800 feet deep, turning us, the university, and Earth below to radioactive fallout shot up in the mushroom cloud. 5 miles from here, and think of where you live, everyone's vaporised. A little boy in Hiroshima was reaching up to catch a red dragonfly in his hand against the blue of the sky, and there was a blinding flash, and he disappeared. And he left his shadow on the pavement. And that pavement is in the Hiroshima Museum, a shadow of a human being. That was the first time man had developed the mechanism to vaporise his fellow human beings. Out to 20 miles, everyone will be lethally burnt. Looking at the flash, eyeballs melt and run down cheeks. People sucked out of buildings turned into missiles travelling at 100 miles an hour with winds of 500 miles an hour. Unbelievable forces of nature. And then the whole area will be engulfed spontaneously in a holocaust of 3,000 square miles. Everything and everyone will burn, even in the middle of winter. And as the cities now are full of oil refineries, plastics, wood, huge amount of combustible stuff that we make, a huge pall of black radioactive smoke will rise up and surround the Earth with a cloud so thick it will block out the sun for about 5 years. Temperatures will plummet to ice age degrees temperature. It will be dark, and that's called nuclear winter. Maybe the cockroaches might survive. They're very radio resistant. Maybe the algae. That could happen tonight. Because these weapons are on hair trigger alert. They take half an hour to go from Russia to America. America picks the attack up with the satellites, and they go half an hour back. So the whole thing's over in 1 hour. And they're still targeting each other, except we're friends. What's it about? I wrote a book in 1984 called Missile Envy. You're not laughing at the back. Have you read Freud? You know, Freud said women are inadequate and they have penis envy. They really wish they had a penis. Penis envy, well, I've never wanted a penis, but anyway, I don't think many of us have. But, so if you watch a missile come out of the ground, it looks like an erection with two big balls of fire. And the generals in the Pentagon hated my book, but they all had a copy on their bookshelves in the Pentagon, because they knew that to be true. It's kind of a substitute for testosterone as these men get older, I think. I don't know. I don't really understand it. So, I'll just tell you about a near miss we had, but this is one of many. Do you know what the football is? Hands up those who know what the football is. Like, not the thing you kick. You watch the president. Always walking just behind him is an officer with a big suitcase, and it's called the football. And in the suitcase are the codes to start a nuclear war. So that if they pick up the attack in Omaha, Nebraska, and they radio back to the White House, the president has a 3-minute time span to decide whether or not to blow up the planet. And the codes to start the war are in the football. When Reagan was shot, they lost the football for 2 days. They lost it. I heard another story the other day about losing the football, but I can't remember. Anyway, in 1995, America decided to launch a weather satellite from Norway, and they told the Pentagon, the Kremlin, but the Russians are sort of hopeless. They lose their data and they lose their cameras, and how often have I been interviewed by a Russian cameraman and they come up afterwards half an hour later and say, Dr. Caldicott, the camera wasn't working properly, will you do it again? You know, and you think, oh my God. Anyway, they launched this missile and the Russians picked it up and they thought that you had launched a missile from your Trident submarines onto Moscow. Yeltsin was the president. Yeltsin was a very serious alcoholic. He had what we call in medicine Korsakoff syndrome and Wernicke's encephalopathy. It really knocks your brain off. Bottle of vodka before breakfast, type of alcoholic. So for the first time in the history of the nuclear age, in Russia, his football was opened. And there he is, sitting in front of the computer. His generals are standing over his shoulder saying, press that button, Mr. President. 3 seconds before the end of that period elapsed, the missile veered off course. That's why you and I are in this theatre tonight, and we're not radioactive atoms up there in the stratosphere. Those accidents occur several times a year in America too, and it's all computerized. And those who understand computers understand this, the geeks who get into computers. The Chinese are hacking into the Pentagon early warning system, Pentagon computers now. And why are they targeting each other? What is the insanity that causes them to do this? And why don't, hands up those of you who knew that our lives are on hair trigger alert. And why don't all of you know it? I want you to answer me. I want one of you to tell me why you don't know it, because it's your right to know if you could be blown up tonight. What? President won't tell it on TV. Yeah, go on. The media. And I would say that with a fair bit of knowledge, because I'm an Australian. And who's the most evil man in the world today? Murdoch. He formulated my career. He used to publish front-page articles in the national newspaper in 71, 72, when I was talking about French tests in the Pacific and we were getting a lot of fallout. Then I started uranium mining and saying this is bad news, and he blackballed me. He broadcast to 2/3 of the world's population, and he will stop at nothing. He is a sociopath. Now, 1 in 25 people are sociopaths. They're brilliant, they're charming, they get their way all the time, and they have no moral conscience. You probably have known some people in your life who are sociopaths. They rise to the top like cream in the military and in the administration. Cheney and Rumsfeld are definitely sociopaths. George Bush was just silly. I met with Reagan for an hour and a quarter, holding his hand, trying to teach him about nuclear war, and he wasn't a sociopath. He was a nice old man. His IQ was about 100. He didn't know much at all, and he had impending Alzheimer's, which I diagnosed. So he was okay, but George Bush was not as bright as Reagan. How could you get a president with an IQ of less than 100 in this country where you have some of the most extraordinary people in the world? What is wrong with your political system? Huh? I'll get into that in a minute. Now, I've done nuclear war, and what we've got to do is abolish these bloody weapons. 22,000. 97% owned by Russia and America, yet they're running around with microscopes saying, ooh, Iran's going to get one. Ooh, what about North Korea? Do you know what that's called? Displacement activity. If you put rats in a cage and threaten them with a lethal situation, they run away and do something irrelevant to that which threatens them. And that's what the politicians are doing, or the people in the Pentagon. I mean, anyway. We're going to fix it, because you're going to have a revolution, and we're going to fix it. So I'm very hopeful now. Now, global warming. The sea levels are rising. The permafrost in the Arctic, do you know what permafrost is? That frozen soil contains millions of tons of methane. Methane is what is occurring with fracking. I love that word, fracking. I mean, you can imagine what the Australians do with that word, because we're very disrespectful. Methane is natural gas given off from coal. It is 20 times more powerful as a global heat trapper than carbon dioxide. And millions of tons of methane are about to be released as the permafrost melts, and millions of tons of carbon dioxide. Now, what's going to happen? The Earth is already heating, and it's like a body. The Earth is really an organism with interreacting systems, like the ozone is the skin or the integument. Our skin is the most important organ in our body because it lets nothing through. The lower level troposphere is a heat regulating mechanism which is centred in our brainstem. And if you get a tumour in your brainstem, your temperature can go right up and you die from hypothermia. You just die because you can't control your temperature. The seas and the rivers are the circulatory system, okay? The trees are the lungs of the earth. They inhale carbon dioxide and exhales oxygen that we breathe. But what are we doing? We're chopping trees down. Why? Well, what do you blow your nose on? What do you blow your nose on? Trees! Don't blow your nose on trees, for God's sake. That's what I blow my nose on. It's called a handkerchief. Now, it's dry, and when it dries, the viruses and bacteria die, so it's a sterile handkerchief. Gets a bit stiff after a while, so I wash it in the shower and I wash my underpants. I hope to have this handkerchief till I die. Well, I'm 73. I don't know, maybe 20 years if I don't lose it. Never, ever use a tissue again. And you know how they advertise them? There's a lovely mother with a soft baby, and she's wiping away the baby's tears with the baby's future. You're allowed to use lavatory paper to wipe your bottoms, although in India they do not use paper. They wash their bottoms, and it's quite nice actually, with their left hand, and eat their food with their right hand. Don't use paper towels. Don't use paper serviettes, for God's sake. We don't, we just go like that, wipe our hands, you know, like that. Lick your fingers. Don't use any trees anymore, because the one thing that all the nations agreed on in Copenhagen when they had that big climate conference was the trees must remain intact. And you're chopping your trees down like there's no tomorrow. And the trees trap the carbon. It takes a tree 500 years to trap its carbon, then we chop it down, we chip it and turn it into paper to wipe our bottoms. I mean, you know, I'm putting it quite frankly. We're crazy, and we don't think about it, and because the politicians have no idea, and because Kleenex, who owns Kleenex? What's the company? What? Procter & Gamble. Say no more. You know, so how many lobbyists have they got? How much do they pay to get their lobbyists into Congress? I'll get onto this in a minute. Now, global warming, the sea levels are rising, many reactors are built around the sea, and as the water levels rise, like in Fukushima, there are going to be meltdowns all over the place. Because global warming is antithetical to the safe operation of a nuclear reactor. I could go into that in more detail, but I won't. If you want to learn more about nuclear power, you're going to read this book, like I read Gray's Anatomy, to become a physician, because you now are all physicians to a dying planet. And you'll underline it and learn every single thing. And if you want to debate with a Tea Party person, you'll clean them up. Debate with Rush Limbaugh, who knows no science, and who is a drug addict, incidentally. Should be in jail. Well, he should be in jail for lots of reasons. And you'll read this book. Now, I want to get on to fracking. The companies have found that they can get natural gas by injecting a whole lot of liquid water at very high pressure, combined with horrible solvents that are carcinogenic, and that force the gas out from the shale underneath, and a lot of it leaks into the air, causing more global warming. A lot of it. They're doing it in Australia, and the farmers are so fed up. They're so fed up. They've got an organisation called Lock the Gate, and they won't let these companies in. But you see, the farmers own the land and grow the food, but underneath, these horrible mining companies have leases, and they can take over the farmers' land if there's gas underneath. Well, the farmers are rising up and joining with the Green Party, and the farmers are usually conservative. Their dams, what do you call them? Dams, ponds, are catching fire because of all the methane that's collecting from the fracking. So fracking adds to global warming. A. B. It disturbs your water supply and pollutes it. And I think people probably use wells around here with carcinogens. And you had that IBM leak, and a huge amount of your underground water is polluted with carcinogens. And C, we've got to stop burning natural gas. We've got to stop burning gasoline or petrol. I call it petrol. We've got to stop burning coal. Like, urgently, because we've almost reached the point of no return. So the temperature control mechanism of the Earth is now almost out of control. And the tipping point where a patient, we think we've stabilised in the intensive care unit, their kidneys are working all right, and we're killing the bacteria and their septicemic problem, and the liver function tests all right. Suddenly, a minor thing goes wrong, like the permafrost melting. And suddenly we lose control of the patient, and they go into heart failure. And then their kidneys fail. And then their liver fails, and that's called total organ collapse, and the patient dies. The planet is in that situation now. We're just one tipping point of the methane and the CO2 and the permafrost melting and the whole thing. The Arctic ice is melting. Oh yeah, but that's good, you know, because guess what? There's a whole lot of oil underneath the Arctic ice. How dare these companies? And why do we let them? Well, politicians are scientifically and medically illiterate, and many of them are idiots. I could name a few, like Bachmann, Palin, you know, all those characters. Well, Obama, I mean, I need half an hour with him to educate him too. He's a lawyer. Lawyers know no science. Many of the people in Congress are lawyers. I don't trust lawyers. They grease the wheels to destroy the planet. Now the corporations, okay, so they will spend hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that the Congress does what they want them to. Now, okay, so I will pose this to you. In Australia, voting is compulsory. We get fined $50 if we don't vote, and we all go and vote, and we consider it a privilege. Now, you live in a democracy. Well, you think you do, but people are dying in Yemen and Syria to have a democracy. And you have the gall, many of you, not to vote? How dare you not vote? I mean, why do you live here? Why don't you go and live in Yemen? Or China, where they probably don't vote yet. You know what a privilege but a responsibility it is, because your country is determining the fate of the earth. It's the most powerful nation on earth, simply because it can blow up the planet in half an hour. You're very powerful, and we're all scared of you. Now what you've got to do is get to know who your congressmen are and know that they are not your leaders. You are their leaders, and that's what Wall Street's about. You have to educate them. They are your representatives, and if you don't educate them every week when they come back to their district, into the vacuum steps Mobil Oil, BP, the nuclear companies, Exelon, you name it. And so it's easy peasy for them. They just walk straight in. The president is not your leader. You are his leaders. And you've got to get that into your skulls. And that's what Wall Street's about. You need to take back your country, back from those wicked corporations who have no moral conscience. The corporations are actually sociopaths with no moral conscience. Bottom and top line is dollar. Are we going to kill the earth for the dollar? For the market? And look what the market's done. What, 20 million people have no job? 50 million people have no health insurance? In Australia, healthcare is free. State of the art. If you're really sick, you go to hospital. Public hospitals. Costs not a penny. Oh, but is that socialism? Oh, that's a naughty word. It's called Christianity, really. You know, the Good Samaritan. Healthcare's your right. Do you know what sort of socialism you really have? It's socialism for the corporations, socialism for the Pentagon, and you don't need a Pentagon anymore. And you need to eradicate nuclear weapons. The Coast Guard can protect you. You don't. Really, the Pentagon is about taking control of the oil in Iraq, taking control of the oil in Afghanistan and the natural resources. Although I heard the other day the Chinese have taken huge natural resources, rare earths, you know, rare earths that we need for our computers and our lithium batteries. Afghanistan's full of it. I think Burma is too. So it's really about territorial imperative. It's not about looking after the earth for you. And they'll kill people in order to get more oil and more profits and more money. But there's no morality. And are we moral human beings? You know, when I've delivered a lot of babies, and it's just a magical thing, out of this big tummy comes this incredible thing, absolutely pure and perfect and innocent. And then people start growing up, reach adolescence, hormones start circulating, and they start to get into money and business, and they start living wicked lives. But then I treat those people on their deathbeds, or when their children are dying, and they fall into my arms and weep. And I see again the beauty and purity of that soul in every human being. We've all got it, and we all know right from wrong. And that's my spirituality, because I know that everyone can do the right thing for the planet. Okay, now the next thing is nuclear power. Or they say nuclear power, that's the answer because it doesn't produce any global warming. Lie number one. And I don't believe that people should be allowed to lie when the earth is in the intensive care unit. I don't believe in freedom of speech when Rush Limbaugh gets on and lies to an ignorant population. If I lie in medicine, I would be deregistered. I would be killing my patients or damaging them. You can't lie in science. You can't lie about what is happening to the planet. And scientists have set it up by working with corporations, and you know, there are 80,000 chemicals in common use, most of which have not been tested for carcinogenicity. We have to prove they're dangerous by getting cancer. They don't have to prove they're safe by throwing them on the market. I could go on and on about the chemicals. There's a whole chapter in this book about them, so you've all got to read this book too. But nuclear power, the first chapter of this book is, well, they're going to build a uranium mine in Australia, like the biggest uranium mine in the world. Do you know how you mine uranium? You use trucks and you use these huge, what are they called, these things that dig the earth out, you know. How do you run them? Oil.
Diesel.
Yeah, diesel. What does diesel do? Mate, it's carbon dioxide when it's burnt. And then you have to crush millions of tons into a fine powder. More CO2. Then in America, our uranium is enriched. Do you know how they enrich it? They use the electricity generated from 2 old 1,500 megawatt coal-fired plants. Whoa! But nuclear power doesn't cause global warming. I can't stand the nuclear power people because they lie. When I debated with Pentagon generals, they knew what a nuclear bomb would do. They knew about nuclear winter, and they kind of couldn't lie. They talked to me about the communists and the Russians, you know, but they couldn't lie scientifically. But the nuclear power people lie all the time. At the moment, a nuclear reactor produces 1/3 the amount of CO2 as an operating gas-fired plant. Within 10 years, as uranium degrades in concentration as we use it all, within 10 years, nuclear power plants are going to produce the same amount of CO2 as a gas-fired plant. And then you've got the radioactive waste. How long does it last? Oh, the EPA says you've got to store it safely for 1 million years. I mean, I ask you, Jesus did only live 2,000 years ago, and we think that's antiquity. What signs are they going to put on the radioactive waste storage? They employ our anthropologists and psychologists, the Department of Energy, Department of Evil, to try and work out what signs they can put so thousands of years from now people know not to dig into that or they'll die. Skull and crossbones? What language? Jesus didn't speak English. I mean, the thing, and you have got 64,000 tonnes of radioactive waste with nowhere to put it. So guess what? We've got a railway line coming through Australia. I can't really draw my own country very well, but it's kind of like that. Built by Halliburton. Who ran Halliburton? The sociopath, Cheney. And they found an Aboriginal station here called Muckaty Station. Well, we don't really count Aborigines. They've got the highest infant mortality in the world. We probably are the most racist country on earth, Australia, towards the Aborigines. So they've decided they're just passing a bill in Parliament now, and it's possible that they're going to bring America's 64,000 tonnes or so high-level radioactive waste back to Muckaty Station over an aquifer that supplies water, archaeological water, to much of Australia, because we're really one big desert. Now, you're near Indian Point, 100 miles from here. You know, the terrorists, when they flew into the World Trade Towers, actually had targeted the 2 Indian Point reactors, but they thought they were protected by missiles, so they flew instead into the World Trade Towers. Had they flown into the Indian Point reactors, you wouldn't be here. Manhattan, the financial capital of the world, would be gone. And right now, hundreds of thousands of people, and I've got the data in my books, would be dying of cancer and leukemia, which is what is going to happen in Fukushima. You all know about Chernobyl, don't you? But the accident occurred because there was a stupid man, a hydroelectric expert, didn't even understand nuclear, was doing a crazy experiment in the middle of the night, pulled out the control rods too fast, I think, and it had what's called an excursion in physics. And there was a massive explosion. And the control room filled up with white powder. And this man said to his two underlings, "Go out and see what happened." And they went out and came back and they said, "It's gone." He said, "What's gone?" They said, "The reactor's gone." He said, "Don't be ridiculous, go and have another look." It was gone. So much radiation was shot up into the stratosphere and the air, it settled all over Europe, Turkey, the Arab countries. It covered the Northern Hemisphere. This report is by the New York Academy of Sciences. They translated 5,000 articles from Russian into English. And up to now, only 25 years later, over 1 million people have died from Chernobyl, of cancer, leukemia, the most gross deformities you've ever seen. And there are pictures of children here. There are homes full of grossly deformed children that we've never seen in paediatrics before. Just ghastly, hundreds of them, caused by irradiation to the normal embryo in the first trimester. And people are still dying. 40% of Europe is contaminated with cesium, which lasts 600 years and causes brain tumours and muscle cancers and testicular cancer. With strontium-90 that causes bone cancer and leukemia. With plutonium that causes cancer in almost every organ of the body and lasts for 500,000 years. I do not eat European food or drink European wine, except when I go there and I practice psychic numbing. I don't buy Spanish olive oil because it fell down in hot spots with the rain. And so you don't know, and you can't taste the cesium, you can't smell it, and it goes to your brain and lodges there and irradiates just a tiny volume of cells with a beta particle for years and years, and those cells get a really high dose, and one day you get a headache and you lose the vision of this side, and that's called hemianopia. And you've developed a brain tumour like poor old Teddy Kennedy had. Cancer takes 5 to 60 years to incubate. A cold takes 2 days. Measles, mumps, whooping cough takes 3 weeks. And that's called the latent period of carcinogenesis. Radiation is a silent killer. Already, I've said, over 1 million people have died, and that's only the first 25 years. This accident, I don't want people to go. Am I boring you? Am I? Please don't leave. Anyway, if Indian Point goes, and the wind's blowing, and the wind changed 360 degrees in the first 24 hours around Chernobyl, and that's why, huge areas got irradiated, you'll be irradiated. And you know what? We can't do anything for you. We don't want to touch you if you come into our emergency rooms because you'll be covered with radioactive elements. We don't want to get irradiated ourselves. The Federal Emergency Management Agency says we take you down into the basement in the mortuary and we hose you down and the water goes into the sewage system, but we can't get the stuff out of your lungs and your brain and your liver. And we can't stop you getting cancer. I can't tell you how many Americans have written to me since Fukushima because you've got a fair fallout. You've got fallout here, New England, Neptunium, which is a very dangerous carcinogen, was landing in New England. Plutonium has been falling in Seattle. The peaches in California, some of them are radioactive. And they say, what can I take? What can I give my baby? Natural remedies. Nothing. I repeat, nothing can counter the effects of radioactive elements in your body, and we can't get them out. In Fukushima, they built 6 reactors, General Electric Mark I, on an earthquake fault. Do you know what the problem with the nuclear age is? Man's fallibility. We have a technology now, nuclear weapons and nuclear reactors, with which we have to be infallible. Chernobyl was caused by a stupid man. 3 Mile Island was caused by stupid men because they'd had a few problems and they had tags over the dials of the control mechanism, so they got out of control. A lot of people have died at 3 Mile Island. Hershey's Chocolates is 13 miles from the reactor. The milk was so radioactive they powdered it till radioactive iodine decayed, but then they used it for the chocolates. But all sorts of other stuff got out. And I described 3 Mile Island in this book because a whistleblower gave me a lot of documents from the Hershey's Chocolates labs. Don't eat Hershey's chocolates, they're medically contraindicated. And I've been saying it ever since the accident, and they haven't sued me, because if they did sue me, the truth would come out. But read about it in the book. But now Fukushima, it's unbelievable. I have to tell you that I think Fukushima, they say, is 2 to 5 times more severe than Chernobyl. So multiply 1 million by 2 to 5 times. This will be really the end of Japan. Well, certainly the northeast, the north of Japan. People who suffered from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who know? And yet the Japanese are a sort of feudalistic society. You know how they bow and apologise and stuff? The women feel inadequate, but the women are rising up because their children are being irradiated. And 300,000 children live in very, very high radiation zones. They're not evacuating them, which they should. They're wearing radiation monitors around their necks so they can monitor the radiation, but they're not evacuating. Children are 10 to 20 times more radiosensitive than adults. They should never be exposed to radiation. So a woman here came up to me tonight. Can I say? Where are you? From Hanford? She lived in Hanford, which was where they built the bombs, and a lot of radiation escaped. She's had her thyroid removed. So that's the future for many of these children from thyroid cancer and other cancers. It's almost beyond my imagination as a paediatrician and a doctor to imagine what's going to happen in Japan. And yet the nuclear industry is right into it, saying we still have to build reactors. Huh? I really can't describe what's happening in Japan adequately to give you a picture of it. Jung said the avoidance of legitimate suffering is the cause of all mental illness. And you, through feeling depressed, you grow. You grow psychologically, you grow in wisdom. And then you reach anger, and you use the anger. White hot anger like they're using in Wall Street. No violence, but use it to take back your country and stop these corporations destroying your future. I could go on and on, you know, I can talk till the cows come home. I could talk for 24 hours to you and you'd all go to sleep. But I've probably covered enough. The other thing is people say, well, what do we do about our electricity? What about base load power? I commissioned this study 3 years ago called Carbonfree, nuclear-free. Why hasn't every house in America got a solar panel on it? Well, if you had solar panels on every house, you would employ hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. The GDP would go up, the jobless rate would fall. Why aren't you making windmills all across your country? The technology's here and it's really cheap. Why aren't there solar panels on all the parking lots? And you can import electric cars for China, plug your car in during the day, charge it up and drive it home and plug it into your house and charge up your house. This is a prescription for survival. By 2050 you can be carbon-free, nuclear-free, and you've got a future. And it's really quite complex. It's written by a plasma physicist. Brilliant. And you can download it. I don't know, where's my piece of chalk? Download it from ieer.org. So, you know, this is what Pelosi had a copy of this, but this is what every single politician in the Congress needs to read. And they'll only read it if you make a fuss. They respond to you if you make a noise. 5 people visiting a congressman means a lot, or woman, and same with senators. Use your power of the people, for the children, and by the people. And I will end by saying, is this not the land of the free and the home of the brave? Have you got no guts? Thank you. How do we find out in America where the fallout from Fukushima landed? Well, I've been following it closely and various people are monitoring it. There's been a large fallout in British Columbia too. The EPA stopped testing. They only test once a month now. They're not testing the fish that are caught on the west coast, and the Japanese have poured monstrous quantities of radiation into the ocean. And you need to know that these isotopes, cesium, concentrates by orders of magnitude up the food chain. Algae, crustaceans, little fish, big fish, us. And you can't taste it. So they should be monitoring the fish caught on the west coast, especially the big fish. They should be monitoring all over the country, and they've stopped. I know someone who knows people in the administration. The word went out from the administration after Fukushima to the State Department and other departments that they weren't to talk about it. And Fort Calhoun, you know, that was flooded by the Mississippi, that nuclear reactor, there was a squash on that too. There's a block out of, there's a cover-up here, and that's wicked. Obama is pro-nuclear. He's funded by Exelon that has 13 reactors around Chicago. David Axelrod, who's his advisor, worked for Exelon. He's got Stephen Chu, who comes from one of the nuclear weapons labs, as his energy secretary. I think Obama's very intelligent. If I could have half an hour with him, I could teach him the medical effects of nuclear power, which I didn't really go into in great depth today because I covered a broader sort of area. Please, God, give me half an hour with Obama and Michelle, because they've got 2 little girls that they adore. And I'd talk to them as a paediatrician and as a doctor. It's what we've got to do. Ed, you know what your great president said, Jefferson? An informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. You've got to get onto your EPA. Get onto them and don't be polite. Be aggressive. Demand. You know, you've got to have fire in your guts now, or we're not going to make it. Now, you've all got to be John and Jones of Arc. Now you're reduced to silence. It's true that the psyche can often take only so much, and then we practice what we call psychic numbing. And that's what we actually do about the nuclear weapons situation. We practice psychic numbing. I mean, it's the elephant in the sitting room that no one talks about. But in practicing psychic numbing, we're practicing suicide. And when we have suicidal patients, we hospitalise them. So in a way, the society is suicidal by practicing psychic numbing and a kind of manic denial. You know, if you read the New York Times, it's the latest fashions, these anorectic models walking down the catwalk and gourmet foods and the whole thing without attending to the real risks at hand. And we have, in fact, an adrenal gland just above our kidney, which if we're chased by a bull, the blood pressure goes up, the blood sugar goes up, the pulse rate goes up, and we can jump a fence six feet high. And that's called fight or flight. It's hard to get that instinct for survival going with kind of a distant problem. Although we did in the 80s, when I first came here in 78, almost every American said to me, it's better to be dead than red. I said, what? Yes, we'd rather be blown up in a nuclear war than be communists. So I said, well, what about the pygmies in Africa? They'll be killed too. And they said, yeah, they don't want to be communists. So I thought, this is mad. I mean, it really was. And I used to go to him through immigration when I was younger, and they'd say to me, you a communist? I didn't even know what a communist was, you know. Anyway, so I got together and recruited 23,000 doctors. And we started doing what we call a bombing run, holding symposia at Harvard and Stanford and all over the country on the medical consequences of nuclear war. 2 days, and they were pretty profound. And the journalist said, what are you talking about this for? This is a political situation. We said, no, it's medical. because it will create the final medical epidemic of the human race. In 5 years, I also had an agent that got me on Today's Show and 60 Minutes, and she'd say to the producers, look, I'll give you Lily Tomlin and Sally Field if you'll take Helen Caldicott. Well, no one wanted a boring old woman doctor talking about nuclear war, who was an Australian, but they wanted Lily and Sally. So she used them to hang my hat on, or a hook. And that way we were able to talk to millions of Americans. We got 1 million people in Central Park in '82, and it was done purely by medical education. And so, I've forgotten the point so in 5 years, 80% of Americans moved to be opposed to nuclear war. I even was asked to speak to the annual Morticians Society, and I said, what do you want me to speak to you about? They said, we don't want to have to embalm radioactive bodies. And I said, well, you'll be one yourself, don't worry. I spoke to the National Presbyterian Breakfast. I spoke to 30,000 Methodist women, and the Methodist Bishop's pastoral letter came out. I spoke to the Catholics all across the country. They wrote a wonderful pastoral letter. So by educating people from a medical perspective, that was the Second American Revolution. It was peaceful, sagacious, and Gandhian. And it was purely done by education, and it led to the end of the Cold War, because Reagan started working with Gorbachev, and I met with Reagan. So, you know, that's why I know miracles can happen. And to put up roadblocks and say, oh, but this, but this, that doesn't work. You've got to be kind of stupid like me, naive, and I don't see any roadblocks. Or if there is a roadblock, I burst the door open, or I'll go in the back door. But I get there because I'm a doctor, and I took the Hippocratic Oath, and I'm practicing global preventive medicine. So having helped to orchestrate the Second American Revolution, let's do the third. And it's starting to happen.